Let's just turn back to the UK because I want to talk about something I've talked about on this show over the last few months, and it's something that I really do care about. It's about how the British state is hiding information from you, the hard-working, law-abiding British taxpayer. In fact, it's worse than that. Politicians and the expert class accuse you of misinformation or disinformation while they deliberately conceal information from you, especially when it comes to things that they'd rather we not talk about, like how mass immigration is impacting our communities and our country. This is why I fully support a forthcoming attempt by Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick coming next week to make statistics on crimes committed by migrants available to the British people for the first time ever. Now, he is proposing a law change that would force them to do exactly that, a move that we should say Reform UK MPs have also been calling for in the House of Commons. The amendment would require ministers to publish every quarter the nationality, country of birth, visa route, asylum status and method of entry of everyone convicted and sentenced to crimes in the Crown Court and Magistrates Court. Similar transparency has already been introduced in several states in the United States of America and in Europe in countries like Denmark, with statistics in Denmark showing that crime rates of the worst offending migrant communities are 8 times higher than the native population. And it's a pretty consistent picture here too in the UK. In fact, it's now indisputable, thanks to a variety of freedom of information requests that have been submitted by independent campaigners, that many nationalities in the UK are significantly more likely to commit crime than British nationals. Now, look, you won't hear about this in Westminster, Oxford, Cambridge or Brighton, but for example, if you look at the years 2021 to 2023, Albanian migrants were almost 30 times more likely to commit crime than British nationals. Similarly, shocking figures were recorded for a wide range of nationalities. And when we zoom in on, for example, sexual offences, the statistics are truly shocking. Foreign nationals were responsible for up to a quarter of all sex crimes committed in Britain between 2021 and 2023, with drug offences also very high up on the list. Afghanistan topped the table of foreign nationalities committing sex offences in Britain. Afghans and Eritreans were around 20 times more likely than British nationals to commit those crimes, with people from Namibia and Chad not far behind. Now, when compared to the number of Brits involved in the same crimes, just take a look right down the bottom of that graphic, that little white part, that's British nationals. The disproportionality with those other national groups is seriously disturbing. But here's my question. Why are we even having to force this data out of the British state through freedom of information requests? Why is the state actually not making this information openly, readily available to British taxpayers who have to live with the consequences of the decisions being taken by politicians in Westminster who continuously insist that mass immigration is good for everybody? And why does the expert class in this country, which routinely prattles on about the importance of evidence, truth and knowledge, not want to make these things available to the British people when they happen to challenge the expert class's liberal views? Those are the questions I want to leave hanging over the show tonight, because it seems to me there's a lot of hypocrisy running through the expert class. And as ever, I want to hear your views tonight at gbnews.com/your say. Of course, reach us on X at gbnews. But I'm joined to discuss this very issue tonight by the chairman of Migration Watch UK, Mehmet. Why is it that the state does not simply make this information available to the people out there who are paying taxes, who are having to live with the consequences of the decisions that are being taken by both Labour and Conservative governments, and governments that are saying to people, as we saw after, for example, Southport, well, you're misinformed to worry about these issues, while not actually giving them the information that they could have to make up their own minds about these policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. They've always argued, and I suspect there may be some of that, we'll hear some of that this evening. But what the government says is it's unfair to produce these facts about individual nationalities, about certain groups,
well,
certain
other
ethnic
countries do
groups.
it. Denmark's
other
doing
countries
it.
do it.
Germany's increasingly
I'm just saying why they argue against it. That we may actually end up sort of focusing on people who are perfectly innocent. Now, I accept that there is a danger of that. However, I also am keen to protect the British people. I'm also keen that those who are genuine actually have an easy passage into the country. That's why, unfortunately, what Robert Jenrick is trying to do just won't happen.
You think the blob, you think the state, the civil service will basically stop, they'll refuse to release this information?
The government will never allow that to go through Parliament. It just won't happen. However, what I would say is that what we should first and foremost do is revert to the sort of policies, the sort of measures that we used to have in place not so long ago. Anyone who comes here has to have a visa. The authority to enter, that must be vested in the immigration officer. We must interview people before they get here and refuse those that we believe may be doing us harm.
This is how insane the situation is, as far as I'm aware. We are not even seriously scrutinising the criminal records of people who are coming into the country. We're not even adjusting the number of visas that we're giving, for example, to countries like Afghanistan or Eritrea, even though we know, based on the data that we can see, and I'm going to take a punt, I think the picture's probably even worse once we get hold of all of the available statistics and information. Why are we not adjusting the number of visas that we're giving out to those countries and saying, look, this isn't about demonising individuals, it's just saying that people from these countries, let's take Albania as an example, are disproportionately more likely than anybody else to commit crime.
Yeah, I agree with all that, Matt. I mean, what I'm saying is that if you had officials who are interviewing those who want to come here, and it doesn't matter that we haven't got embassies in Eritrea or whatever, the fact is, there are a number of places where it wouldn't be realistic. Nevertheless, a lot of those coming from Afghanistan, they're not coming direct from Afghanistan, they're coming from other safe countries. What we should do is stop them at the border, have a very quick interview and establish that they're not asylum seekers, they're not genuinely coming here, and refuse them and send them back to the safe country they've come from.
I have a quick question as well that maybe somebody can help me answer. Zoe Groneveld, Esther Kreku. When are we getting the BBC verified video on migration and crime? Because we get all of this talk endlessly about disinformation, misinformation, post-truth politics. Basically, views and attitudes that the elite class don't like are wrapped up as being misinformed people. But if the state was so confident about these decisions that it's making, it would just get all of the information out there. It would say, here you go. Here's the evidence, here's the stats.
Well, look, I think data, the more data you have, the better, right? The more data for the police or social services or whatever, the better. But the problem is you need your data to be fully contextualised. And if you're just publishing the data of nationalities without contextualising it, so compare it to somebody...
How do you contextualise the fact that Afghans are 20 times more likely to commit rape?
OK, so if you have somebody who's come over from a war-torn country, what sort of support were they given when they arrived? What adverse childhood experiences might they have had? How long have they been in the UK? All these things can impact their propensity to commit crime.
Problem with it. We shouldn't have to tolerate any of it. And I think it's about making the state accountable. If you see that these certain nationalities commit certain crimes disproportionately, well, then what is the state doing about it? A quarter of our prison spaces right now, we talk about overcrowding, are full of foreign criminals. First thing, deport. If our prisons are overcrowding, we should never be looking to try and get petty thieves off the street. We should be saying who shouldn't be here, who shouldn't be taking up these resources. That's the first thing. Secondly, we should have a zero tolerance for any sort of foreigner committing any crimes. But because once you've whittled that down, then actually what you'll reveal to the British public is actually there are a lot of British nationals committing crimes that are also unpalatable. So for the grooming gangs, for example, a lot of them were British nationals. So it wouldn't just be like, oh, Pakistanis are committing that, because that's what the graph would have shown, but it's actually showing Afghans and Eritreans. It will make the British state accountable, and it would allow us to have an adult conversation. No one is saying that just because you're a foreigner, you're more likely to commit a crime, but it's about knowing your place and knowing what the British society should tolerate. We shouldn't tolerate any foreigners committing crime. We also have to take responsibility for our own nationals committing crimes.
I completely agree with you, but there is this point about transparency and accountability, and the reason I keep going on about this issue, and viewers know this, is and I don't want to pick on you as a representative of the left, Zoe, but the left talks endlessly about transparency, trust the experts, don't be disinformed, don't be misinformed. But then they're concealing all of this data from people, which this is what makes it worse. They've got this information. It's taking independent campaigners like the Centre for Migration Control and others to have to submit freedom of information requests to the state, which is being paid for by taxpayers to get the information that taxpayers should be given anyway.
But I think it can be cherry picking, right? Because there are other things, other bits of data that are collected that aren't published about people who commit crimes here in the UK.
Like?
Well, for example, your income tax bracket. That's not the sort of thing we would publish, but it might be quite useful.
I don't care how much money a rapist makes. If they're from outside the UK, they commit that crime.
But my point is there can be correlations with things, and sometimes the publishing of the data doesn't necessarily help the issue at hand. It can just inflame tensions when it's not properly.
So there we are. So this is the view that it will inflame tensions out. It will inflame tensions.
Well, I think what I suggested, not quite so eloquently, Zoe. That doesn't matter, I think, if we're going to inflame tensions. The fact is that we should put the interests and the safety, the security of British people,
but then you need to give a full account of the picture. You need to contextualise it.
Living here. And the reason why the government won't reveal all these facts and figures and is not more transparent is because they're afraid that they will be forced into actually doing something about it.
I think the only thing I want to know and taxpayers want to know is, are people respecting the laws of this land or are they not?
But if you can also find data that shows you a clear link, say, for example, adverse childhood experiences and the link between that and people going on
Why is that our problem?
No, because it can help us fight, because it can help us prevent crime, which is surely the point here, right?
It's not our responsibility to try and fight the crime for people that are in this country that are not British nationals committing crimes. The reason why I'm saying this is because imagine we've got these league tables of all the people committing crimes and all the individuals have been identified. They've committed the crime, they have been expelled from the country because they don't have a right to be here. Do you know what you happen? You have a league table saying who's committing the most rapes? Oh, it's British nationals. Then you can ask the state.
We already know that's true.
Hold on, what are you doing to hold these people to account? I don't really care where you're coming from. I care what the state is doing to hold people to account. That's my problem. Well, I'm not going to look at an Afghan and be like...
The majority of criminals in this country are British-born,
but that's because most people in this country are British-born.
I agree, but I'm saying you can cherry-pick the data. Actually, we have a problem with people committing, for example, violent offences in this country. We have people with sexual misconduct, sexual offences in the country. Why aren't we focusing our attention on how we prevent those incidents from taking place?
Because we need to clear... I'm sorry.
A quarter of all sexual offences in this country are committed by people from outside of the UK.
All sexual offences are terrible. Shouldn't we want to stop all of them? Why are we focusing on a subset?
The British state has a responsibility to the British people. In order to get to the root of the problem, you need to clear the field.
Absolutely.
There should be no conversation about why did this Afghan person commit a rape? You shouldn't be here, period. We need to clear the field so we can get to the root cause of issues that are caused by our own people.
Well, I think we can all agree that we need a stronger border security system where people are checked before they go in, obviously. But if we're talking about preventing crime, we're talking about keeping people safe.
So if an Afghan migrant came here and raped a British girl, that Afghan migrant should be allowed to stay in the UK.
He could have raped an Afghan girl. I don't care. You shouldn't be in the UK.
Well, you said we should contextualise.
You just said that.
We should contextualise.
No, I'm talking about the data. You can't just publish a load of data and not break it down and say, actually, let's look at, for example, Afghanis. In that case, you might have more people coming from a war-torn country. They might not speak the language. They might not have assimilated. They might have adverse childhood experiences, poverty,
The debate will indeed carry on. Let me just abuse my position as presenter. My view is very simple. Break the law, you go.